Dear students, I, Geetu Sharma, Assistant Professor at Shree Atam Vallabh Jain College, is going to describe a topic which is under the subject that is commercial law. So, all the contents used for preparing this presentation, there is no any commercial motive, then all the content has been taken from books and from the web. So now our subject is commercial law and topic is contingent contracts. First of all, we must know that what are contingent contracts. Contingent contracts, as the name indicated, as the name suggests, these contracts are contracts which are contingent or dependent on some event, and that some events are future uncertain event. Uncertain events are those events which may or may not happen. So that's why contingent refers to which may or may not happen. So contingent contracts are those contracts which are contingent or which are dependent on some future uncertain events. So in simple word, a contract which is dependent upon the happening or non-happening of an uncertain future event is said to be a contingent contract. So there is one example that a X contracts to sell B 20 bales of cotton for rupees 10,000. The condition is if the ship by which these bales are coming, that ship returns safely. So here the contingent event is the ship returns safely. So that depends whether ship is going to sink or whether ship returns. So we can say that the contingent contracts are those contracts which are contingent or dependent on some event. Here some event is if the ship by which they are coming returns safely. So now definition of contingent contract as per section 31 of ICA Indian Contract Act 1872. So now what is the definition of under section 31 of ICA 1872? That a contingent contract is a contract to do or not to do something if some event which is collateral to such contract does or doesn't happen. Okay. Now the example is a contract. A contracts to pay B rupees 10,000 if B's house is burnt. So this is a contingent contract which is depending on the happening of a future uncertain event. Now in this example, future uncertain event is fire. So when the house of B is burnt, only then the A will pay rupees 10,000 to B. So all this contract in between A and B, all it dependent upon the contingent event, and that contingent event is fire. So we can say that a contingent contract is a contract to do or not to do something if that event collateral to such contract does or doesn't happen. Now there are some essentials of a contingent contract. The very first essential is contingent contract is a kind of conditional contract. Conditional contract means which is based on a condition. So until that condition is fulfilled, the contract cannot be performed. The second condition is essential is the contingent event that must be collateral to contract, so that the event on which such contract is dependent that must be collateral to main contract. Third is performance depend upon happening or non-happening of future uncertain events. So that may be enforceable on a happening or enforceable on non-happening. Fourth one is contingency can also depend on the will of a person. So it depends upon the future conduct of a living person. Fifth is enforcement of a contingent contract. That enforcement of contingent contract, its enforceability is under the rules of Indian Contract Act 1872, and that rules lies in section 32 to section 36. Now we are going to explain or discuss all these sections one by one. The very first rule. So I'm going to explain rules for enforcement of contingent contract, all that rules from section 32 to 36 of ICA 1872. The very first rule is section 32. Contracts contingent on event happening. The contingent contract to do or not to do something if a future uncertain event happens. So the contract is contingent on happening of an event. So when that future uncertain event happens, only then that very contract will be enforceable. So there is one example that A contracts to pay B rupees 10,000 if B's house burned. Here the happening of event is fire, and when the fire will happen and B's house will burn, only then A will pay B rupees 10,000. So contract contingent on happening of event, that is enforceable on happening of an event, and unenforceable or void when event becomes impossible. Next, second rule is, according to section 33, contracts contingent on the event not happening. That means when that future uncertain event becomes impossible to happen, that means now we are going to sure that that event will not happen in future. That event becomes impossible. Only then that contingent contract will be enforceable. For example, A agrees to pay B rupees 1 lakh if certain ship doesn't return, and the contract can be enforced only when the ship sinks. Because when ship will sink, only then we will sure about that now the ship will not return anytime. So that uncertain event becomes impossible now. So at that time the contingent contract will be enforceable. So the contracts contingent on non-happening of an event enforceable when event becomes impossible to happen. Now the third rule is, according to section 34, contract contingent on the future conduct of a living person. That means such a contract can be enforced only when that living person acts accordingly, because that contingent contract depends upon the future conduct of that particular living person. Here example is, A agrees to pay B rupees 1 lakh. The condition is if B marries C. Now, whether B will marry C, it depends upon the willingness or conduct of B. So, the condition is that contract is contingent on the future conduct of a living person. So, the contract will be enforceable only when B will marry C. Okay, so the agreement becomes void if, say, B marries someone else. Okay, so contracts contingent on future conduct of a person, that is enforceable only when that person acts accordingly. Now the rule is section 35. Contracts contingent on happening of a specified event within fixed time. So there are two conditions, two contingencies are there. The very first is specified event and second one is fixed time. So the contingent contract which are dependent upon the happening of a future event within the fixed time period, that will be enforceable only when that event happens within that fixed time period. For example, A promises to pay B rupees 1,000 if a certain ship returns within 9 months. Here are two conditions. The very first is certain ship returns and fixed time is within 9 months. So the contract becomes enforceable if the ship returns within that 9 months. Okay, and the contract becomes void if, say, the ship doesn't return within 9 months because it got burnt or sunk. So contracts contingent on happening of a specified event within fixed time, that will be enforceable only when the event happens within that fixed time. Now The rule 5, according to section 35, contracts contingent on the non-happening of an event within a fixed time. Now two conditions are non-happening of an event and within a fixed time. Okay, so same example is there, but the condition is changed, that non-happening is there. So A promises to pay B rupees 1,000 if the ship doesn't return within 9 months. The contract becomes enforceable when the ship doesn't return and 9 months will expire. So the contract becomes void if the ship returns within 9 months. So the contract's contingent on non-happening of an event within a fixed time, that will be enforceable when the time has expired. Okay. Now, the last rule is rule number 6. According to section 36, agreements contingent on impossible event. Okay. So, all the contingent agreements to do or not to do anything, if the contingent agreement is based on any impossible event, as we all know that if the event is impossible to happen, that means that can never be happen in future. Okay, if the event can never be happen in future, that means that very event is impossible and there is no any clause of contingency is there. Okay, so examples are: A agrees to pay B rupees 1,000 if two straight lines shouldn't close a space. The agreement is always void. A agrees to pay B rupees 1,000 if B will marry A's daughter C. Here C was dead at the time of the agreement. If C was dead at the time of agreement, that means the agreement is void ab initio. Okay, because the event is impossible to happen, that A cannot marry C because C was dead at the time of agreement. So the agreement is always void from the beginning, from the inception. That's why that cannot be enforceable. So the contingent contracts on to do or not to do anything on any impossible event that are always unenforceable or void when event becomes impossible. Thank you so much. This was about our topic, and our topic was contingent contract. So our topic is finished now. Thank you so much.